welcome everybody to this Ivo seminar. We are very happy to have Ernst Fehr here to present. Let me just say that this is the second of the 3 seminars we have in the fall. There will be a final seminar for this fall in a month, and that would be Oriana Bendetta from LSE. But today we are super happy to have Ernst Fehr here, and the chair of today's talk is Robert Gibbons.
Thanks, Morten, for this and all the organizing. Mandy, you must be out there somewhere. Thanks very much to Mandy Chan for making everything work. Ernst, you need no introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway and steal 90 seconds that you could have used for speaking, so my apologies. So Ernst Fehr needs no introduction. You know all about him for work in behavioral, experimental, and neuroeconomics, and around fairness and trust and reciprocity and things like this that obviously are around organizational economics. And you also know his work specifically in organizational economics. So I think of things on relational contracts and informal sanctions, authority, reference points, and subgame perfect implementation, seeing Mike Powell right there. I wonder if Tom Wilkening's on here as another co-author. Anyway, Ernst, thank you very much. We're very excited to have this. Off you go. As you know, we'll do 2 breaks as you've scheduled them in your slides, and there can be discussion at the end. And I will try to keep an eye on the chat. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for the introduction. So let me share my slides. It should work. Yes. So you can see them. They are big enough. Yes. Okay. So yeah. Topic of my presentation is the dynamics of norm formation and norm decay, and it's joint work with my former graduate student Ivo Schurtenberger. And to motivate the presentation, let me point out that social norms are an omnipresent phenomenon in our social life, and they, in my view, really seem to permeate many domains of our economic and social interactions. And it's also worthwhile to point out that humans as a species are pretty unique in the extent to which its social life is guided by normative prescriptions. So here are a few examples. You all know of the 10 commandments. Think of gender relationships. They are thoroughly permeated by social norms. Think of the Me Too movement, dress codes, honesty norms, the norm to keep promises, reciprocity norms. And today I want to particularly talk about norms that favor participation in collective action and cooperation. Here are a few salient examples of such norms. So when you look at human history, then food sharing norms played a huge role, and they're still prevalent in hunter-gatherer societies. They play an insurance function, so they could insure themselves by sharing the food from large game. Then participation in warfare in hunter-gatherer societies. Here I have a quote from a Matthew and Boyd paper in PNAS, where they describe how those who didn't participate in warfare were punished. So they write, deserters and cowards in raids against neighboring groups were chastised, tied to a tree and beaten by age mates. Then here is an example of norms against strike breakers in industrial conflicts, taken from the British miners' strike in 1984. It's a beautiful example of collective action. Quote is, to isolate those who supported the SCAB union. So these are the strike breaker union. Cinemas and shops were boycotted. There were expulsions from football teams, bands, and choirs. SCABs were compelled to sing on their own in their chapel services. SCABs witnessed their own death in communities which no longer accepted them. So these are all examples of how norm breakers have been punished. Then there is the famous work by White and Röttlisberger and Dickinson that describe how those who work too hard in peace rate environments are often sanctioned by their peers because they want to kind of control the ratchet. They want to avoid the ratchet effect in these companies. And then here is a very impressive example because, for example, the British Army, they didn't have a draft before World War I. And so they were, and also during World War I. And so basically before World War II, they had the problem when the Germans threatened them, they had the problem to mobilize volunteers basically for their army. And within 14 months, they mobilized 2.5 million volunteers. And there are very vivid descriptions how those who didn't volunteer got punished. For example, those who did not join faced the contempt of their community members who attached big red patches to the free riders' front door at night so that everybody could see that the person living there was a dodger. Now you might ask yourself, what does this all have to do with organizational economics? This is about many other things, but it has a lot to do because there is a lot of scope for unexploited cooperation in companies. For example, many companies over the last decades had compliance problems because their employees didn't live up to the norms in the company, or the companies had bad norms. For example, in the pharmaceutical industry, sales agents often claimed benefits beyond legally approved prescriptions, leading to billions of fines imposed on these companies. Then there were also many scandals in the banking industry, but it's not just these two industries. There are many other industries where you have compliance problems. And then we all know that there is a multitasking problem in companies. So the multitasking problem, if you think of incentives in organizations, I believe the multitasking problem is really one of the pervasive problems in organizations. And they severely constrain the use of individual incentives, and this lack of incentives leaves many potential gains from cooperation unexploited. Therefore, establishing cooperation norms could help exploit this potential. So I believe that that there is a lot of scope to mobilize cooperation, the higher rates of cooperation in companies to make companies more productive. Now, I don't have a working paper yet of my presentation. I have given this presentation, unfortunately, many times without writing up. I just didn't have time. But there are two publications where you could look at if you're interested. I have a popular piece called Behavioral Foundations of Corporate Culture, where I describe my view on this. So this is directed at an educated lay audience, but perhaps it's also interesting for some of you. And then I have a review article called Normative Foundations of Human Cooperation. This has been published about 2 years ago in Nature Human Behavior. They are both, they can both be downloaded on the internet. Now let me come to the definition of a social norm. So what do I mean by a social norm? Well, I define social norms as commonly known standards of behavior that are based on widely shared views of how individual group members ought to behave in a given situation. So there are three crucial features in this definition. First of all, a social norm applies to a particular group and to a particular situation. And it's not defined in terms of actual behavior, but in terms of a normative behavioral standard, namely how group members ought to behave. So it's a commonly known standard of behavior, okay? And it is widely shared, and that also implies that it is approved, and this is commonly known. So these are, in my view, the defining features of the social norm. And in this context, there are many open questions. There's, for example, we still don't fully understand how and when such normative standards of behavior emerge. Actually, I think this is one of the big questions, the big unanswered questions in the social sciences, I believe. And how are they maintained and when do they decay? Does the existence of a normative standard have an independent causal effect on the type of behavior that is demanded by the norm? And if so, why does the social norm exert a causal effect? Could it be that the standard generates itself a compliance motive? For example, if I seek others' approval, I might be more conformist and therefore I might be more willing to comply. Or is it simply, does it simply act as an equilibrium selection device? So there are many different possible ways, possible behaviors on which we could cooperate, and a standard, normative standard could help coordination. Then fifth, do norm violations undermine or change the normative standard and the extent to which it is widely shared? Does the standard also affect informal norm enforcement behavior? So is it not just affecting compliance, but also the willingness to enforce the norm? And finally, does it affect responses to norm enforcement behaviors? So all these questions are basically not really well researched because, well, it's these are difficult questions. And in my view, answering all these questions requires a clean measure of a social norm that is of a widely shared normative standard. And what we do in the paper, we develop such an empirical measure that gives us the level of the social norm, that lets us observe the changes in the social norm and the degree of social agreement with the normative standard. Okay, and by making, so to speak, the norm, you could also call it a kind of a high frequency measure. What we develop in this research, in this study, is you might call it a high frequency measure of a social norm that enables you to really observe how it evolves over time. And so we can answer many of these questions. Actually, I believe that we can contribute to answering question 2 to 7, but not yet question 1. So the most important one: how and when do normative standards of behavior emerge? But I have some ideas on this, and we could talk about this in the discussion. Okay, so here is the workhorse we use. The workhorse for our study of social norms is a public goods experiment. And it's a repeated public goods game for 15 periods that's known by all participants. And in all treatments, a group consists of 4 group members. The payoff schedule is set up in such a way that 0 contribution maximizes an individual's payoff at the contribution stage of the game, regardless of others' contribution. So you might think of at the contribution stage, if you would just look at that stage and you would forget the other stages, then the Nash equilibrium, if that would be isolated, would be 0 contribution. But of course, it's embedded in a more complicated environment, so it's a state. It's basically just a stage in an overall, in a big game. And then maximum contribution maximizes overall group payoffs. Okay, so there's a stark contrast. People, if they maximize social welfare for the overall group, then everybody should put all their endowment into the public good, but 0 contribution is, so to speak, in the individual self-interest. Now, depending on the treatment, we have up to 4 stages per period in that game. So we have first a norm formation stage. We have second a contribution stage that I just described here on the top of the slide. Then we have third a punishment stage, and fourth a counter punishment stage. Now, why did we introduce a counter punishment stage? In the counter punishment stage, those who have been punished on the punishment stage, they can counter punish. And we introduced that complexity because it makes the problem of sustaining or generating cooperation more difficult. Because if you can be counter punished, if you have punished, you're more likely not to punish, let's say, a free rider, and therefore the public good is more difficult to sustain. So just to make the problem harsh, more difficult to solve. Now here is where are our thoughts for a norm formation opportunity. So what should a norm formation opportunity be? What should that be? Well, it should provide us with a measure of a normative standard. So recall, that's the definition. A social norm consists of a normative standard that prescribes how one should behave, and that should also be widely observed, so to speak, widely shared. So we need to be able to observe such a thing as a normative standard, and at the norm formation opportunity stage, it should give us a measure of how widely the standard is shared, so the social agreement with the standard. And now we were thinking, when we were trying to solve that problem, we thought, what about face-to-face communication? Could we allow people to talk to each other? Well, the problem is that that's not ideal because there are many potential confounds if you let people talk before they play the game, but know the rules of the game. So first of all, communication itself doesn't yield a clearly measurable normative standard. People talk to each other, and you have to infer that from what they are talking, so it's not so easy. The second problem is people observe each other, so they could be ex post side payments to the game that you are not controlling. Lifting the personal identity could bring reputational issues to the scene, which you want to avoid. And then finally, there could be sympathy with some people if you see them. There could be antipathy and so on. Another possibility would be anonymous or merely numerical communication, but that does also not provide a clear measure of what is normatively approved. So we finally decided to come up with this proposal. So here is our norm, how our norm formation opportunity stage. So before they go into the contribution stage of the public goods game, subjects answer the following question at the norm formation stage. In your opinion, how many tokens should each group member contribute to the project? And by asking subjects about what everybody should do, they indicate their individual normative standard. And then we compute the group mean. We just average the individual normative standards and feed that back to the group and tell them, according to the average opinion of your group, each group member should contribute the following number of tokens. And by doing this, we enhance a shared understanding about the appropriate actions. And so we facilitate with this norm formation opportunity two key aspects of a social norm. First, a normative standard and its shared understanding. Okay, so that's the claim. And by the way, I will have, if you might doubt that, I mean, you might have doubts that this is really doing the job, but I have a validation procedure later on that I describe that basically increases probably your willingness to believe what I have just said. Now, here is the experimental design, the overall design. We have 4 treatments. We recruited roughly 450 participants from the University of Zurich and Nottingham. And the 4 treatments are different in terms of whether they have a norm formation opportunity or not. So that could be present or absent. And whether there is a punishment and counter punishment stage present or absent. Okay. So whenever there is a punishment stage, there is also a counter punishment stage. So that always comes together. Okay. So stages 3 to 4. So basically, the treatments differ whether they have a stage 1, which is the norm formation opportunity, and whether they have a stage 3 and 4. Okay. And these 4 treatments, so for example, norm formation opportunity present versus absent allows us to study the impact of a norm formation opportunity on behaviors. And the punishment absent or present allows us to study the impact of this punishment and counter punishment opportunity on behavior and norm formation. Okay, good. So here is a little bit more information about the different stages of this game, of a game. So recall, the public goods game in its most complex version has 4 stages. It has a norm formation stage, a contribution to the public goods stage, a punishment stage, and a counter punishment stage. And on the norm formation stage, we ask what you already know. In your opinion, how many tokens should each group member contribute to the project? And the mean answers are conveyed to the group. On the contribution stage, each member could contribute between 0 and 20 tokens.
Yes,
and,
my name is Brett Pratt.
Is there a question?
I think we're good, Ernst. I think that was ambient noise. Off you go.
Okay, so at the contribution stage, each individual group member can contribute between 0 and 20 units to the public good. And if I contribute $1 to the public good, each group member earns 40 cents. So we have 4 group members. That means the group as a whole earns $1.60. So I give up $1, the group earns $1.60, but I get back only 40 cents. So you clearly see the individual incentives. I lose 60 cents for every $1 I put into the public good, but the group as a whole gains basically 60 cents. Okay. Then the punishment technology is they could impose between 0 and 10 punishment points on each of the other players in the group. and after they saw their contributions to the published good, okay? So that's important. I first say what I want, what I think everybody should do in the group. Then I get the feedback, what the average means we should do. Then I contribute to the published good. Then I get feedback about what everybody contributed. And then I can impose punishment points on everybody if I like. I don't, but that's costly. So for every punishment point I impose on another group member, I have to pay a token, and the other group member has to pay 3 tokens, okay? And there is a separate punishment endowment here, and all group members are punishable. And then there is a counter punishment stage, which has again a punishment technology of I have to pay $1 to impose a punishment, a cost of $3 on you. I have a decision space that goes from 0 to 5, and only group members are targetable for punishment who punished previously another subject. Now you might say, why do we do this? Well, basically we tilt the level playing field again against getting cooperation. Why? Because only those can punish who have been punished here on the counter punishment stage. Okay, we can go into a discussion why we did this. There is a reason for that. Because if we allowed everybody to punish here, then nobody rationally will punish in the punishment stage, because I want to avoid that I get counter punished, and then I only punish at the final punishment stage if everybody can punish everybody. And in order to avoid that, I let only those punish who have been punished in the counter punishment stage. That of course generates, if you like, something like an experimental demand effect potentially, because I'm asking exactly those people who have been punished, do you want to punish? And that might induce more counter punishment, but that might inhibit punishment and therefore might inhibit cooperation. But that also just means I make it harder to get cooperation, okay? So I don't worry about this as long as I get a lot of cooperation, because I just make it harder to get it. So this is the experimental design. And these 4 stages in the most complex form of the game are repeated for 15 periods. Now, in some of the treatment conditions, the first stage is not there. In other treatment conditions, the 3rd and the 4th stage is not there, okay? Good, now here I put in a slide, 5 minutes break for questions, just that you know that you can ask me about things that are not clear.
Well done, Ernst. We have currently 0 questions in the chat. So I think either you've talked about things that are totally clear or things that are so hard, like what's a norm, that we don't have any questions. But if people develop questions, now's a good time.
Well,
I'm sure they'll come later, so we can save these 5 minutes if there aren't any now.
I got one. So the counter punishment technology is not quite as good in the sense that they don't have the same endowment. They cannot fully pay me back, right? They only go up to 5. What's the rationale there?
Well, that you know what you typically see in these games is, I mean, we allow for 0 to 10 here. The typical punishment is 0, 1, or 2 at the individual level, and rarely more. So it's never binding here, basically, not even when you impose a constraint of 5. So the whole essence of the punishment stage is here that if you aggregate over many individuals who jump on a free rider, then in the aggregate, the punishment for the free rider is high, but at the individual level, each one only bears a little bit of a cost, you know? That's exactly the situation of a community where, let's say, I stop communicating and interacting with you. It's a little cost for me because maybe we have been friends before. But if everybody does this, it's pretty hard on you, but it's not harsh on me, you know. That's kind of the rationale. So it's not a binding constraint, basically. Okay, other questions? So everything is clear. So I hope at least. Then let's
okay, Ernst, we'll put 2 extra minutes into the next break. Off you go. Thank you.
Okay, so now what are the conditions under which a stable and widely shared normative standard emerges? That's a question that interests us. And in order to answer that question, we interpret the average normative request as a normative behavioral standard. Okay, that's an interpretation. It's clearly the best candidate for a normative standard, but I show you in a few slides that we have an independent validation of this interpretation from additional experiments that directly elicit the normative appropriateness of different cooperation behaviors. And then if you believe me that we have now this normative standard, we have really the object we are interested in. We have the social norm, you know. Basically, we can observe how that average evolves over time, okay? And we can examine the degree to which group members agree with that standard. And that's basically the trick, if you like, of the whole paper, or not yet written paper. So, question, does a shared agreement on a normative standard emerge over time? Well, what we did is we look over the 15 periods, how does the coefficient of variation with regard to the individual normative standards emerge? So if they all demand the same normative standard, the coefficient of variation, there's no variation basically, but if that coefficient is big, then we have a lot of disagreement. And what we see here is that when we start here in period 1, the social agreement on a normative standard is pretty similar when you have a punishment option and when you have no punishment option. But over time, the social agreement converges to very little differences among the group members, very few differences, whereas with no punishment, disagreement increases. So we have a little bit of disagreement, but a fair amount of agreement. I mean, this is how you see it's the glass half full or half empty. But under punishment, there is a social agreement emerging, and under no punishment, a social disagreement emerging. So that's the first important observation. Now, the next, so there's a strong social consensus with punishment opportunities, and strong disagreement without punishment opportunities emerges. Now, how does the normative standard itself, so the average over the individual odd statement, evolve over time? Well, what you see here, they start, so the content of the norm, if you like, so the normative standard itself demands initially 90% of full cooperation. And it goes up to even more than 90%, maybe 93, 94% of full, so almost full cooperation, and it decays. So this is how the normative standard decays without punishment, okay? So this is what you could call a decay in the social norm, okay, over time. And this is where the social norm is basically upheld when there is a punishment opportunity. And then, so basically, we have a significantly more demanding and more stable social norm with a punishment opportunity. And finally, two subjects obey the normative standard. And here we see the biggest differences. There's a strong obedience to the demanding norm under punishment opportunity, and there's strong disobedience evolving of an already lenient standard without the punishment opportunity. So what we have here is the deviation from the norm on the y-axis, and basically the deviation is constantly about 10% when there is a punishment opportunity, and here it goes up to almost 70% deviation from the social norm. And now we did a lot of regressions, econometrics, in order to understand the dynamics of this process, and I summarized this on one slide. So what happens here? So initially, we have observed there is a high normative standard with a fair amount of disagreement in both treatments. This normative standard is immediately violated, significantly without the punishment opportunity. Where do you see this? Well, you see it here. This is immediately violated, okay? And this violation, this triggers further norm violations. So a norm violation in period t-1 triggers further norm violations in period t. It also triggers a decline in the normative standard in period t. and it triggers an increased disagreement about the normative standard in period T. So norm violations trigger all these processes, and each of these factors seems to contribute further to further norm violations and decreases in contributions. So there's kind of a vicious, a bad circle, not a virtuous, it's a vicious circle of there is initial norm violation, and that triggers further norm violations, a decline in the norm, in the social norm, and a weakening of the social norm by having more disagreement about the normative standard. Now, what is different with a punishment opportunity? Okay, so basically what's quite interesting is all these forces that I have described here, 1, 2, and 3, they're also, in particular 1 and 2, no, not all the forces, only 1 and 2. With a punishment opportunity, we can also detect that they are there. Okay, it's not different. What's different in the punishment opportunity is that they are counteracted by the punishment activities of the group members and a strong agreement about the normative standard, basically. Okay, that's what prevents the downward trend, the decay in the social norm. And okay, now let me come to my promised validation of the social norm. So everything hinges here on the claim that the average over individuals normative standards is the social norm. Okay, so that everything hinges on that, because that's our object that we can observe. Now, how do we validate that? Well, there is a method developed by my colleague Roberto Weber and his former postdoc and graduate student Erin Krupka, which in the experimental literature is called the Krupka-Weber method. And subjects in this method are asked to judge a given action as normatively appropriate or inappropriate. And they have 5 categories to judge. They can say the action is very appropriate or very inappropriate. They can say it's appropriate or inappropriate, or neither appropriate nor inappropriate, so morally neutral. And subjects are rewarded if their answers match the most common answer. Okay, so basically subjects have to form a belief what is the most common answer, and then when they are correct, they get a payment. Now the idea behind this method is the following. If there is a widely shared normative standard, then judgments will be coordinated on the normative standard, because that's what is salient. And if no norm exists, answers will be dispersed. So basically you will see a spike in the distribution, so to speak, of answers at the social norm. Okay. And so what we do is basically we apply this method now to our setup. We ask third parties. So these are not the participants who participated in the experiment, but these are third parties. They read our experimental instructions of the norm formation with punishment game and of the norm formation with no punishment game. Okay, it's an across subject design. So these are not the same third parties. So some third parties read the instructions of norm formation with punishment. Some third parties read the norm formation with no punishment treatment. And then we ask them for their judgments for period 1. So third parties are informed about the actual average normative standard of that period. And then they are asked to judge the normative appropriateness of low cooperation, of medium cooperation, which is 8 to 10 tokens, or of high contributions to the public good. Okay, we do the similar things for period 15 of the game. Again, third parties are informed about the whole evolution of the average normative standard up to that period 15, and the actual behavior up to period 14. So they know the normative standard in period 15. They know all the behaviors up to period 14, and then they are asked the same question. The normative appropriateness questions with regard to low, medium, and high contributions. And here you see the results. So here you see for the punishment treatment the following. So look first at the blue lines. The blue lines show you what people say in period 1. Okay, these are their social appropriateness statements, and if they think a behavior is totally morally appropriate, then it gets a 1. If they say it's totally inappropriate, it gets a -1. If they say it's just inappropriate, it gets a -0.5, and if they say it's appropriate, it gets a +0.5. Okay, and if they are neutral, it gets a 0. And what you see here is that high contributions in period 1, they are considered as highly morally and normatively appropriate. And medium contributions are considered as pretty inappropriate, it's a -0.2, and low contribution as very inappropriate. This is period 1. Now, when you look at period, and by the way, in period 1, the average normative request was 18 to 20. And that's in the punishment treatment is true for period 1 and for period 15, basically. So it doesn't change, basically. Now, when you look at period 15, you see that these normative statements, they are even strengthened. High cooperation is still very appropriate, and medium and low cooperation is even more inappropriate because a star here indicates significant differences. Okay, so basically what you have is high cooperation is the normative, is the social norm in period 1 in the punishment treatment, and that's true also in period 15. And that coincides with an average normative request of 18 to 20. So this means that the average normative request of 18 to 20, which is close to the maximum, is really reflecting a social norm. Now let's look at what happens in the no punishment treatment. In the no punishment treatment, look again first at the blue lines, period 1. It is very similar. The blue line here is basically indistinguishable econometrically from the blue line here. There's no significant difference. So basically, and again, the average normative request in period 1 was 18. Okay, so they had a very high average normative request, and that is associated with by third parties with third parties saying the contributing high between 18 and 20 is the morally right thing to do. So basically, we validate this average normative request by third-party statements. Now, when you look to period 15, this dramatically changes because this red line looks very different from the red line in the left graph. Because the red line is now the normative statements from third parties in period 15 after they have observed that the average normative request fell to 8. And that's exactly the medium contribution. Okay, and now the average normative request is judged as the morally most appropriate thing to do. Okay, whereas the other two are less morally appropriate. So basically, we have an independent validation here via the Krupka-Weber method that the average normative request indeed reflects the social norm. Okay, so 5-minute breaks for questions again.
Very good. Well timed. So we have a combination of questions from Shannon Liu about sort of comparative statics, and then maybe we jump to Yoni Ben-Basset about heterogeneity. And if we have time, we come back to Wendelin, but I think the dynamics question and you've almost answered after he asked it. But Shannon. And then Andrea.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, so I have a question. This is fascinating. So I have a question on how the pattern vary with variations in the relative size of the punishment and the counter punishment. And so sort of the reason why I asked that is I think my read of social norm is usually embedded in some kind of power structure. And the asymmetry, I thought you wanted to actually capture that with the punishment and counter punishment tokens. And so would be curious to see when you vary the relative size, when does the sort of the punishment equilibrium breakdown? Is it necessary that you have to have a big gap between the punishment ability and the counter punishment ability?
That is a very good question. So I always thought I do another experiment where I introduce player heterogeneity into this setup. Because what I don't have here is heterogeneity. And therefore I cannot talk meaningfully about power structure. Because they have all the same payoff space, so to speak, the same action space. And because they have the same action space and the same means to punish, I have no power asymmetry here. Now, when you move to a heterogeneous population, let's say there are different benefits from the public good, there are different opportunities to punish, you bring in, of course, more realism, but also quite a bit more complexity. And I have some ideas how we can do this in a meaningful way, but I have not done it yet, to be honest. I mean, here it's a symmetric environment where we see that the norm basically breaks down and the compliance with the norm breaks down. But, you know, in the previous research, we couldn't meaningfully speak of norm compliance because we had no observable object. Now I have an observable object. I think that's the contribution here. I have a thing, I have a measurable object that I can credibly claim to be a social norm. Yeah.
So Yoni's question is about heterogeneity of a different kind. Yoni, do you want to pose that? And then we can, Wendelin, I think we'll declare your question answered and go to Andrea and see if Steve Tadelis wants to open up something after that. Yoni.
Okay, thank you. Well, my question is maybe a bit off topic, but well, I was thinking maybe have you looked at the relation between those deviated relatively more from the standard and their own declared standards from the first phase of the experiment? I mean, if they had any change, maybe they saw the norm and then they were relatively more, what happened to them in regard to their first declared standard? That's the point.
Well, it depends whether you are in a punishment treatment or in the no punishment treatment. So the interesting thing is in the punishment treatment, everybody maintains a high normative standard, actually. So whereas in the no punishment, and actually in period 1, this is identical between the punishment and the no punishment treatment. But then the norm violations trigger a decay in the social norm. And then what we see is a bimodal development. Half of the group, which is 2 group members basically, they still maintain a high norm and the other half goes down. So basically it's not that everybody goes down. This is how the social disagreement emerges. So some people, they still want to maintain a high standard, hoping that this helps to maintain cooperation. And the other people might probably say, well, it doesn't anyway help. So let's be realistic and let's hope that a lower standard is at least obeyed. And basically what we show is that whenever you deviate from the norm, you get quite a bit punished when you are in the punishment treatment, but that cannot happen in the. That's what keeps people in line basically. And I mean, what I was not sure that this will happen, you know, initially I thought it is possible here that the norm itself, that letting people stipulate normative requests might really maintain cooperation, but it didn't basically. And this research made me think of, made me believe that, you know, when you think of reality where you don't have the advantages of laboratory control, there is no social norm in reality without punishment. I think there doesn't exist a social norm. I mean, you still would have to tell me a social norm where there is no punishment. I think there will always be some people who are willing to punish you when you violate what is a normative standard. And this is why in reality you never can take away the punishment opportunity. But this is what you can do in the lab. But in reality you can't take it away. and what we see here is then it really unravels quite quickly. Interesting.
Okay, we have a couple bonus minutes saved up from before. Andrea, you politely raised your hand, but I don't know the content. Did somebody else already ask your question, or do you have a new one?
I have a new one that actually ties in very well with what Ernst was talking about at the end of the last question. By the way, I really love this. I think it's very useful, and I'm looking at it from the eye of someone who's interested in organizational economics and political economy. When in my fields, when you think about norms, you think about something very stable. You think about organizations, corporate culture. Changing corporate culture takes years. It's very difficult. We don't know how to do it. When we want to change the norms of a political of a polity, it's even harder. And your experiment is amazing because in I think less than an hour, you manage to change norms, and you show that people are following and are thinking about different norms. So I think you have this very powerful tool to change norms. And I want to try and think about timing. So in your experiment, you change norms in an hour. In the world, I know norms don't change in less than years, months. How do we reconcile these two very different times? Is it different norms? Is it different? I'm lost. Can you help me think about it?
Well, I think it has to do with, so the most important thing I really can cleanly take all the punishment. Can you hear me?
Ernst, you're breaking up a little bit.
So let me stop for so I have to close some of my applications. That's what the computer told me. I stopped sharing for a moment, but still talking to you. Okay. So I close all kinds of things. So is it better now?
Yeah.
Can you hear me better now?
We don't see you.
But we hear you fine.
Can't see me.
But we all know how handsome he stands. Okay.
Okay. So now you can hear me. I will share again after. So the most important thing is to be really able to take away all of punishment at once. No, the whole peer punishment that happens usually is no longer possible. And the other thing is, and that's what I describe in my little public paper on behavioral foundations of corporate culture. I think in the public goods game, when you explain to the people the structure of the game, a normative desire for regulating this situation almost naturally emerges. So that is very important. So this normative desire to regulate, and this means that, for example, this ties nicely up to think of the no smoking norm. When did the no smoking norm emerge in our countries? Well, when we knew about the negative externality that is imposed on passive smokers. So as soon as you have these externalities understood by the people, there is a normative request for controlling the behavior of those who exert the externality, who impose the externality on others. But this is now, we hammer that, so to speak, in the experiment in the brains of the people because we make them understand the structure of the game. But in many real world situations, in many situations in the company, the public goods aspect of a behavior is not so visible. And I think it has a lot, I think, so basically, I have a little company called Fair Advice. and what we do is when we give advice, we tell them, you have to make the externality clear. As soon as you make the externality clear, people start understanding much better what they need to do in order to reap the benefits of cooperation. You know, and this is, I think this is very important. And this is, by the way, also an implicit criticism of experimental economics, because we make clear to the people that what is the incentive structure of a public good? We basically tell them, you're all better off if you cooperate. Okay, well, what does that trigger? Well, if we are all better off if we cooperate, well, then let's cooperate. Okay, so the normative structure, the normative desire emerges almost naturally, whereas in reality, that's not at all always clear, you know. And then, of course, in reality, you also have distributional effects that also play a role, that kind of interact then, of course, with this. Yeah. So I just see that my camera somehow does no longer work.
Well, and can you share your slides? Because it's about time to switch back to the last part of your talk.
Yes, I share my slides. So it's not so important that you can't see me, I think. Huh? So it's more important that you let me let me see. Sorry for all the. Okay. Zoom. I have too many stuff open. Okay, I share my slides. I think that's the most important thing. Share screen. Can you see my slides again?
Yeah, but you might want to make them bigger. Yeah, right there.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. Perfect. So basically, what I have shown you so far is the decay in the social norm, and the dynamics that trigger that decay. Now, a lot of what I have told you is based on correlations, because I didn't. The exogenous variation that I had so far is between punishment and no punishment. Okay. Now, in the last part of my talk, I want to talk about the causal impact of the norm formation opportunity. So here I get that causation. Okay, so I take it away and I let it there, the norm formation opportunity, and then I study what happens with contributions with punishment of free riders and its effectiveness in reducing free riding, given that we have a norm formation opportunity or we don't have one. Okay, so here are the behavioral effects of the norm formation opportunity on contributions. If I have no norm formation opportunity, then contributions decay over time. That's a classic result. But with norm formation, they also decay. So basically, what that tells you, the norm formation opportunity alone has no impact on behavior. It's not the fact that people say you should contribute. If you don't give them the weapons in terms of peer sanctions to enforce it, it doesn't work. Okay. So basically, norm formation opportunity has no impact. Now, if I do this in the punishment treatment, then I see I get a stable increase in cooperation through the norm formation opportunity stage. Okay, that's the graph on the second slide here. So this is what I would claim to be the causal impact of social norms on cooperation behavior. Okay, yeah, they have a bite, but only if they come together with a punishment opportunity. Now, let me then go on and ask, how does the norm formation opportunity affect punishment behavior? Do people punish more under norm formation? Well, you will be surprised, they punish less. Because what you see here is the blue bars. So first, let me say what this figure shows you. You have here on the horizontal axis the deviation from the average contributions of the others in the group. Okay, and on the vertical axis, you see how much these individuals have been punished by others in the group as a function of their deviation from the average behavior of the others in the group. And what you see here is the following. The more you deviate from the others in the negative direction, so the more you free ride, the more you get punished. So that's true with and without norm formation. But with norm formation, you get punished less. That's quite interesting. So with norm formation, you get punished less. Okay. Now, you see also a little bit here that something that has been called antisocial punishment. This is when you do more than what the average does in the group. when you have no norm formation, this is the red graphs, the red bars, then you have a slight increase in getting punished from the other group members. So you stick out your head, you want to be, you kind of signal, I'm the super compliant guy, whoom, you get a little bit on your head. Don't claim to be you are the super compliant guy. Now, so we have, and the interesting thing is that norm formation operates on both sides. It decreases punishment of free riders and it decreases punishment of extra cooperators. Okay. Now we have a third phenomenon that I cannot graphically show, and that is the following: the higher the average contribution of the players that are not targeted for punishment, okay, of the cooperators basically, the more the target is punished. So basically, let's say we are 4 in the group, okay, 3 of us are cooperators. We don't punish each other, but we punish all the third one, the fourth one, and we punish that guy. The harsher, the more we 3 cooperate. So basically, the punishment is harsher when we cooperate more. Yeah. And that ratchets up, of course, the reason. And now what's really interesting is this final point written in blue here on the bottom of the screen. Peer punishment becomes more effective and stronger for higher average cooperation levels. That follows from this third point here. Okay, so peer punishment becomes more effective. Now you might ask yourself, isn't this a contradiction? On the one hand, when there is a norm formation stage, they cooperate more, but they punish less when they have a punishment opportunity. Okay, they cooperate more but punish less. Why is that the case? Well, we tried to study the mechanisms behind this these phenomena, and we do this. We want to know whether the norm formation opportunity changes the preferences of the players in favor of cooperation. So does the norm formation opportunity itself lead to a higher preference for cooperation? And we do this with an experimental design that we can discuss in detail. Believe me, it's clean. It's based on a 20-year-old paper where we have shown how this method works. And I show you here just the graph. So here, what we elicited here, this is an additional experiment. This is not with the same people previously. This is an additional experiment. And what we do in this experiment is we elicit people's willingness to contribute to the public good as a function of others' average contribution. Okay? And what you see here is the following. If there is no norm formation, basically there are 2 things that are noticeable here. Both the red and the blue line, they are below the 45-degree line. Okay, that's important. They are both, so 45-degree line would be here at 5.5, at 10.10, at 15.15. So basically both lines are below the 45-degree line. And that means that in the absence of punishment, the only equilibrium is here at close to 0, basically. Why? Because when I believe others contribute 20 in the no norm formation game, then on average what people contribute is 12. Okay, so that naturally depresses their beliefs. Next period, when they believe others contribute 12, they will contribute 7 or 8. So basically you have a natural built-in unraveling mechanism given this structure of voluntary cooperation as a function of others' believed cooperation. Okay, so notice this is without punishment here. We elicited these schedules, there's no punishment here. So this is really just voluntary cooperation as a function of what you believe others on average contribute. And the important thing now is, for our purposes, is when you introduce a norm formation stage, you increase voluntary cooperation, but not sufficiently such that there could be an equilibrium sustained. But there is a big but here. If I have a mechanism that makes you believe that people cooperate more, you have higher voluntary cooperation in the red situation compared to the blue. So for this identical beliefs, there is more voluntary cooperation, which explains why you get, with less punishment, you get more cooperation under the norm formation stage. You have less punishment, but more cooperation. Because for the same given belief about others' average cooperation, you get more voluntary cooperation. And that's, according to myself and my co-author, is the mechanism that drives the results behind what we have seen. Okay, so the driving mechanism, let me summarize. The norm formation opportunity increases the willingness to cooperate, conditional on others cooperating, yet the pattern of conditional cooperation is such that in the absence of a punishment opportunity, cooperation necessarily unravels. So if others, and that means if others do not cooperate, the opportunity of building a norm is of little help. However, any mechanism, for example, peer punishment, that ensures that others cooperate, mobilize the forces of conditional cooperation. And that explains why less punishment generates more cooperation when you have a norm formation opportunity. And with that, I can summarize basically. We developed a simple method that provides a measure of social norms and how it changes across time and environmental conditions. It enables the study of the evolution of norms and their causal impact on cooperation, punishment, and norm obedience. Initially, a demanding normative standard emerges that is, however, subject to a fair amount of disagreement. Punishment opportunities give rise to a stable and demanding social norm that is largely obeyed. Disagreement quickly vanishes. Stable and demanding social norm emerges and is largely obeyed. Higher cooperation and lower punishment of free riders. But without the punishment opportunity, disagreement about the normative standard increases over time. There is a steady decline in the normative standard and even a bigger decline in the obedience to the normative standard. So the norm formation opportunity has no impact at all on actual cooperation. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Okay, well done, Ernst. First of all, with that, we thank you. Fabulous. Thank you very, very much. That's the terrible thing about Zoom. You see lots of hands and you can't hear hardly any of them, but oh well. Okay, now, the way we run this usually is there's another 12 minutes until 1/4 the hour for open discussion. There have been a number of things in the chat. Let me tee up a couple of them. I think Jo van Briesbroek wants you to do free consulting from Fair Advice concerning his department or something like that. Just kidding. Relatedly, Mike Powell had a question. So in the spirit of getting people in who hadn't been in yet, let's start with those two.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to respond. So one thing that's very stark in the results is that without a punishment technology, and you put it very explicitly, it necessarily unravels. But so in our department, the place I know the best, we struggle with this voluntarily input in social goods a lot, and we always fear, should we make things more explicit and have automatic punishments if people are skimping on effort? And we go back and forth what's optimal. But I don't see this necessarily unraveling. I don't feel we're on a slope downward without explicit punishment. So I guess punishment may be something very broad, but I always feel we don't have enough of it, and still we don't unravel.
Yeah, so let me answer this. I mean, in your setup, you have many other incentives operating. You have reputational incentives, you have repeated game incentives. I mean, you don't want to be a complete free rider. Most people do a little bit, you know. And so basically you do have implicit or maybe sometimes even explicit sanctioning mechanisms. And the way I view sanctions is, here in the experiment, I call a sanction a situation where I can spend $1 to destroy 3 of yours. But that's only done to make it visible what a sanction is. In reality, we call it actually in when we give advice to companies, we don't call it sanctioning, we don't call it punishment. They don't want to hear that word. We call it feedback. We call it feedback, and feedback can be the following. I put my hand on your shoulder and say, Joe, didn't we agree last week that we do it this way? Probably you forgot. It would be really nice if you do it. And that's my first feedback I give to you. Now, if you don't change your behavior, the next time my face might look a little bit more angry and say you, and so on. So basically in companies, what we do is for example, we had a consulting case where we had profit centers that needed to cooperate in order to really get the synergies out of the company, to really mobilize the synergies. And we agreed not only on what should be done, we agreed also, I mean, we basically engineered a norm in the company that says you should not just do the cooperation behavior, you are also responsible for the feedback. And feedback means that you remember, you remind the other people what we agreed on. You know, I send you an email basically reminding you friendly of what we agreed to do. And if you still don't respond, I send an email to you and CC it to all the others. Okay, so we had basically an escalation mechanism built into. And I think the important thing is that the sanctioning has to be, you call it first of all feedback, but the feedback has to become part of the normative structure. It has to be part of the normative structure in order to work. Now, in your example, there are many things still operating that are not identical to my experiment, because there's still punishment. I mean, in any real world situation, you have where people closely interact with each other, there's always a little bit of encouragement, social hints, gossip. The department chairman might tell you it's now time to do your share or whatever.
Okay, Mike Powell, was your question more about the experiment, but about a similar set of issues? And can we do that briefly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more about the experiment, but you have 4 people playing this sort of repeated game for 15 periods. I can punish you for you not contributing today by not contributing tomorrow. And so even in the situation where you don't have punishment explicitly in the experiment, there's still this sort of ability to punish. Moreover, it's sort of that opportunity necessarily is tied to these contributions and therefore to what you're measuring as the norm. And so I'm sort of wondering whether there's a way of separating out these 2 different dimensions of what the punishment treatment is doing. A, it's allowing for targeted punishments, and B, it's allowing for punishments that themselves aren't directly tied to what you're measuring and communicating as the norm.
I think this is very key what you mentioned here. I think that I can target the punishment to the free rider in the punishment treatment, whereas in the no punishment treatment, I punish everybody in the group if I withdraw my cooperation. And so the group members don't know how to interpret that. They might say, well, this is another free rider, but perhaps I'm not a free rider. I'm just angry and don't want to cooperate anymore when the others are not cooperating. And actually, I can tell you about an early experiment where we, this was published in Chibo, I think more than 20 years ago, where we thought that when we, after period 15, let's say, I tell everybody what everybody did. And we thought by telling them that at the beginning, they anticipate that they will be kind of punished verbally or in other ways for not cooperating. But that didn't work, because in the end, through reciprocity, some people don't cooperate because they are mad at others. Others are true defectors. So you have all these ambiguous interpretations about what it means that somebody doesn't cooperate. And by giving people a targeted punishment opportunity, you can basically, you can stipulate your message in 2 ways. and people understand the message. If they are punished, they increase their cooperation level. So that's basically in the next period. You can observe that every year on average, those who get punished, they increase their cooperation behavior.
Okay, Ernst, at some point you said, yes, we hammered it into them in the experimental design, and that relates to a set of questions that Steve Tadelis has been asking before, during, and after your comment. And then if we have time, Laura Boudreau and Andrea Pratt have some other questions about heterogeneity, and then I think we're done. Steve.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ernst. Very interesting, very clean. But where I'm struggling with is the idea of norm formation and like Andrea, a little bit about norms changing, which again, from my experience in industry, I would maybe even go a step further and say it doesn't take months or years. Often it just doesn't change until a company quietly or not so quietly dies. And the role of this central authority, you, the experimenter, when you start off by saying, I'm going to announce the average, I think there's something where you're hijacking what norm formation is about there. You're creating this authority of here is something we should focus on. And when I look at the fact, and I thought there was a very interesting observation in your data, where you showed that without punishment, there was without norm formation, there was more punishment. And I was thinking whether punishment, because they can't communicate in any other way, becomes a form of communication. So I think that trying to understand better the issue of communication, and by setting this idea of an average, you are setting the stage of expectations, whereas with communication, people might talk about very different things. You know, that's where I'm lacking here. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that aspect.
First of all, I fully agree with your view that punishment is also a means of communication. What is the appropriate thing to do here? So that is, I think that's pretty clear. On the other hand, that's not the only thing what people do when they punish. I mean, there's a paper by Ivo Schurtenberger and others where they don't give people, where they let people punish, but the punishment kind of is, how do they do it? It's kind of only told to the people at the end, at the very end. So basically, I'm not, let's say I free riding period 5, you punish me in period 5, but I only get to know this at the end. Now, what people do, if I remember correctly, people still cooperate in that environment because they anticipate that they will be punished. So it's not just that they want to, so they punishment for various reasons, and one function of the punishment is that they communicate what's appropriate. But even if they can't do that, there is punishment, and it's anticipated. Now, when it comes to the central authority, I believe that plays a crucial role. I believe that if you want to change social norms in a company, you have to, we do it always bottom up by letting people develop themselves the gains that they could have from the cooperation. And I think you have to participate, you have to make them participating in the gains from cooperation. Otherwise, these normative things don't emerge in the same way. So I give you an example. For example, we were hired by a company who had years of problems where they didn't have a clean workspace. People just threw the stuff on the floor. They had a very dirty workspace, and basically within a month we were able to change that situation by talking to them and by letting people form the norm themselves, plus the sanctioning structure. So basically we established work groups, and they come together, let's say 10 people, and they discuss the issue, and they design the behaviors themselves that they want to have, that they think is normatively appropriate, and they design the sanctions themselves. It's just, I mean, we give advice, of course. We are there, we are kind of the moderators of these discussions. And in this, you might say, well, this is a small work group, but of course you start small. Now, if you, it gets certainly more difficult when you have companies with many employees. But I mean, if I have been in contact with UBS quite a bit, and they had quite some problems with compliance up to 2012. And they radically reshaped the normative structure in the company. I could see that, and I think they were successful. So, but it was basically norm entrepreneurship from the top to the bottom, and they were successful in my view. But I don't know whether I answered your question, but I think the central authority is important when it comes to hammering. I mean, that was an exaggeration. We describe everything in very neutral words in the experimental instructions, and we don't suggest what they should do in the experimental instructions. We just make very clear what the incentive structure is. And they understand the public goods aspect of the situation. That's what I mean. And when they understand that, then I bet that almost naturally normative, actually there's a famous sociologist, Jim Coleman. This is his theory of social norms. He says a demand for a social norm emerges when others impose a negative externality on me. Then I develop the desire to control their actions. And when people find it legitimate to control others' actions, that's when norms come into being. I think we should all read Jim Coleman's chapter on the foundations of social theory on social norms. That's really a very worthwhile chapter.
It's certainly the most economics-y chapter I know in sociology, so no wonder we like it. But okay, we're a little bit over time. If people need to go, of course, please do that. There is one more question out there. I'd love to get Laura Boudreau from about the lab and Andrea about the world, if we can talk about heterogeneity. Ernst, do you have 3 more minutes for us?
Of course.
All right. And did Laura, oops, did we lose Laura already? Nope,
Sure,
there you are.
I'm here,
Laura.
sorry, I'm having some, yeah. Hi, I was just curious, you're having these groups go through, the exact same game. And I was wondering, within the punishment and the non-punishment treatment arms, whether you saw much variation across groups in the norms, the norm itself that was formed by the group. So are all groups forming the same norm, or was there some, variation in that? And if so, do you have a sense of, why groups form different norms?
Well, there is variation, in particular between Zurich and Nottingham. we did this in Nottingham. So I showed you the merged results, so the aggregate results. So what we have is a level effect. Nottingham is in cooperation levels always a little bit below Zurich. We also see some variation within Zurich, but not so much in the punishment treatment, because punishment is an enormous homogenizer. Mm-hmm. In the punishment treatment, a minority of group members, let's say 1 or 2, they can achieve a lot by punishing the others. So the heterogeneity is always much bigger in the no punishment treatment. Mm-hmm. Where basically the heterogeneity because we don't have this homogenizer, the sanctioning, the peer sanctions.
That means we must be close to overtime. But Ernst, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. Let me just tee up for future discussion Andrea's question: why do we see different norms in different firms in the same country, right? You gave us the variation between Nottingham and Zurich, but there's more variation out there. So thank you for a wonderful discussion. Very grateful. Be safe, people. Nice to see you all.